Deep in the dying light of the 41st millennium, there exist questions that haunt the Imperium of man like ghosts in the machine. Where are the Emperor's sons? What became of those demigod generals who once strode across the galaxy like living legends? The Primarchs, those 20 genetically engineered titans created to lead humanity's greatest crusade, each met a different end. Some fell in glorious battle, their deaths witnessed by thousands. Others simply vanished, leaving behind only whispers and legends, and a few remain active, shaping the fate of the galaxy even now, 10,000 years after the heresy that tore the Imperium apart. Today, we're ranking every single Primarch's final fate, from the absolutely confirmed dead to the total mysteries that keep lore enthusiasts awake at night. We're going to explore what happened to each of these 21 individuals, because yes, there are technically 21 when you count the twin Primarchs as separate entities. We'll examine the evidence, discuss the theories, and try to make sense of one of the most fascinating aspects of Warhammer 40,000 lore. This isn't just an academic exercise. Understanding the fates of the Primarchs tells us something profound about the setting itself. It reveals the nature of permanence and change in the grimdark future. It shows us that even gods can fall, but also that some mysteries are meant to endure. The Primarchs were created to be immortal commanders, superior to mortals in every way, and yet they proved as vulnerable to fate as anyone else. Some were killed by their own brothers, others were claimed by chaos. A few chose to walk away from it all, disappearing into the darkness between stars. The Emperor of Mankind created these beings in his secret laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains, during the closing years of the 30th millennium. Each Primarch was designed to embody specific aspects of the Emperor's own nature, genetic templates that would birth entire legions of space marines. They were intended to be the vanguard of the Great Crusade, the reconquest of the galaxy in humanity's name. 20 gestation pods, each containing an infant demigod, each destined to lead one of the Emperor's space marine legions. But the Chaos Gods had other plans. In a catastrophic intervention, the ruinous powers scattered these infant Primarchs across the galaxy through the warp, depositing them on distant worlds where they would grow up far from their father's watchful gaze. Some landed on civilized worlds and rose to become nobles or generals. Others crashed onto death worlds where only the strongest survived. Each Primarch's childhood shaped their character, instilled different values, created the men they would become. When the Emperor finally reunited with his scattered sons during the Great Crusade, he found not perfect replicas of his vision, but fully formed individuals with their own philosophies, strengths, and fatal flaws. The Horus heresy changed everything. 9 Primarchs turned traitor, leading their legions in a civil war that nearly destroyed the Imperium. The galaxy burned as brother fought brother, and by the time the fires died down, many Primarchs were dead or missing. The survivors were left to pick up the pieces of a shattered dream, to rebuild an empire that would never again reach the heights it once promised. 10,000 years have passed since those dark days, and the Imperium still bears the scars. Understanding what happened to each Primarch requires us to sift through layers of propaganda, legend, and deliberate obfuscation. The Imperium has reasons to hide certain truths. The Inquisition has redacted information about events too terrible to remember. The Chaos Forces spread lies and rumours to sow confusion. Even the Space Marines themselves sometimes embellish their Primarchs' tales, turning history into mythology. But by examining the most reliable sources, the Black Library novels, the Horus Heresy series, and the various codexes and supplements, we can construct a reasonably accurate picture of what befell these 21 demigods. Some fates are absolutely certain. We know exactly how certain Primarchs died because their deaths were witnessed, documented, and central to major events in Imperial history. These are the Primarchs whose ends came in battle, whose final moments were recorded by those who survived. Their deaths shaped the course of the Imperium and left permanent marks on the galaxy. There's no mystery here, no room for doubt. These Primarchs are definitively, irrevocably dead. Others exist in a strange state of confirmed survival. They walk the galaxy even now, active participants in the current timeline. Some serve the Emperor still, returned from death or long sleep, to lead the Imperium in its darkest hour. Others have ascended to demonhood, becoming creatures of the warp who command vast forces in service to the Chaos Gods. These Primarchs aren't mysteries at all. We know exactly where they are and what they're doing, because Games Workshop has brought them back to the tabletop, given them models, rules, and ongoing storylines. Then there are the complicated cases, the Primarchs whose fates fall somewhere between confirmed death and total mystery. Maybe only part of their body was recovered. Maybe they were seen dying, but their death was never verified. Maybe they're perpetuals who can resurrect from any wound. These Primarchs occupy a grey area in the lore, where official sources give us conflicting information or leave crucial details ambiguous. They're the ones most likely to return in future storylines, because their deaths were never quite certain enough to rule out a comeback. The missing Primarchs represent another category entirely. These are the sons of the Emperor who simply vanished, walking away from the Imperium for reasons known only to themselves. They disappeared into the warp, or the webway, or into self-imposed exile, leaving their chapters to wonder if they'll ever return. Some left prophecies or promises of eventual return, others just vanished without explanation. The lore gives us fragments of their final journeys, but never the complete picture. We know they went somewhere, but where? And do they still live? And finally there are the total enigmas, the Primarchs whose very existence has been called into question. The twin Primarchs who may have faked their deaths multiple times. The lost Primarchs whose records were deliberately expunged from Imperial history, whose names are forbidden, whose legions were erased. These represent the ultimate mysteries in Warhammer 40,000 lore. Questions that may never receive definitive answers because the ambiguity serves a purpose. They're the blank spaces on the map, the shadows at the edge of the campfire's light, the unknowable elements that make the setting feel vast and dangerous. So let's begin our journey through the fates of the Emperor's sons, starting with those whose ends are absolutely certain and working our way toward the deepest mysteries. Along the way, we'll explore the circumstances of their disappearances, examine the evidence for various theories, and consider what each Primarch's fate tells us about the nature of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. We'll look at the confirmed dead, the definitely alive, the probably dead, the possibly alive, and the utterly unknown. By the end, you'll have a comprehensive understanding of what happened to each of these 21 demigods, and why their fates matter to the setting as a whole. Before we enter the 41st millennium, a simple request. Subscribe to Obsidian Scriptorium. For you, it's a simple tap. For me, it's proof of loyalty that keeps the Inquisition from auditing my existence. The Emperor protects those with good metrics. Now, let the story begin. Let's start with the most definitive category, the Primarchs, whose deaths are beyond any doubt. These are the ones who fell during the Horus heresy or its immediate aftermath, whose demise was witnessed by reliable sources and whose bodies were accounted for. There's no mystery here, no ambiguity, no possibility of surprise returns. These Primarchs are dead, as in permanently removed from the setting. Games Workshop would need to perform serious retcon gymnastics to bring any of these back, and given how their deaths are woven into fundamental aspects of the lore, such resurrections seem extraordinarily unlikely. The Warmaster himself, Horus Lupercal, Primarch of the Lunar Wolves who became the Sons of Horus, died in perhaps the most significant death in all of Warhammer 40,000 lore. His demise wasn't just witnessed, it was the culmination of the entire Horus heresy, the climactic moment that ended the galaxy-spanning civil war and determined the fate of humanity for the next 10 millennia. Horus was the Emperor's favourite son, the first Primarch to be, reunited with his father and the one chosen to bear the title of Warmaster, Supreme Commander of the Great Crusade. But Horus fell to chaos after being wounded on the moon of Davin and manipulated by the ruinous powers. His corruption began slowly, seeds of doubt planted by Erebus and the word-bearers, but once it took root, it grew with terrible speed. The War Master, who had been humanity's greatest champion, became its most terrible enemy. The final confrontation between Horus and the Emperor took place aboard the War Master's flagship, the Vengeful Spirit, in orbit above Terra during the closing stages of the Siege of Terra. Horus had been empowered by all 4 Chaos Gods, transformed into something far beyond even a Primarch's already formidable capabilities. He was a vessel for the combined might of the ruinous powers, a being of such terrible power that reality itself bent around him. The Emperor teleported aboard the Vengeful Spirit with a small strike force, including the Primarchs Rogal Dorn and Sanguinius, as well as various Space Marines and Custodians. But Horus manipulated the warp to separate the boarding parties, isolating the Emperor and forcing him to face his fallen son. Before the Emperor reached Horus, Sanguinius confronted the War Master, and in that battle the angel was slain. When the Emperor finally reached the throne room, he found the body of his most beloved son broken and discarded like refuse. What followed was a battle that transcended the physical realm. The Emperor fought with one hand metaphorically tied behind his back, unwilling to use his full psychic might against his favourite son, still hoping that some spark of the old Horus might remain. This mercy proved costly. Horus, empowered by chaos and freed from any remaining humanity, nearly killed his father. The Emperor was mortally wounded, his body broken, teetering on the edge of death. Different versions of the lore give different accounts of what finally made the Emperor act. In the classic version, a lone Imperial Guardsman or Terminator named Olanius Pius interposed himself between the Emperor and Horus, trying to protect his god despite having no hope of survival. Horus obliterated this brave soul utterly, not just killing him, but destroying him so completely that not even his soul remained. This final act of casual cruelty, the willingness to snuff out even the smallest light of courage and loyalty, finally convinced the Emperor that his son was truly lost. In that moment of clarity, the Emperor unleashed the full fury of his psychic might. He struck at Horus not just with physical force, but with power drawn from the warp itself. Power that burned through the War Master's enhanced body and annihilated his very soul. The Emperor didn't just kill Horus, he erased him from existence. He burned away every trace of his son's essence, ensuring that the Chaos Gods could never resurrect their chosen champion, that Horus Lupercal would never return in any form. Horus's body fell, an empty shell that had once housed one of humanity's greatest heroes. Later, Abaddon the Despoiler, Horus's most powerful follower, would destroy even this shell, casting it into a fire and claiming the title of War Master for himself. There is no Horus anymore, no genetic material to clone, no soul lingering in the warp awaiting resurrection. The Emperor made absolutely certain of that. Of all the Primarchs, Horus is perhaps the most definitively dead, because his death wasn't just the end of his physical body, but the complete annihilation of his existence across all levels of reality. The impact of Horus's death cannot be overstated. It ended the heresy, yes, but it also doomed the Emperor to 10,000 years of immobile agony on the Golden Throne, kept barely alive by the sacrifice of thousands of psychers every day. It shattered the Imperium's dream of a galaxy united under enlightened secular rule, replacing it with the paranoid theocracy that dominates the 41st millennium. Horus's betrayal and death cast a shadow over every aspect of Imperial culture, creating wounds that have never healed. If Horus's death was the most significant, Sanguinius's was the most tragic. The Great Angel, Primarch of the Blood Angels Legion, died doing exactly what he always knew he would do, sacrificing himself in a futile attempt to stop Horus and give the Emperor a chance to finish what he started. Sanguinius knew he was going to die. He had foreseen his death through visions granted by his psychic powers, seen himself standing before Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit, seen the War Master's mace descending toward him. He knew, and he went anyway, because that was who Sanguinius was. The circumstances of Sanguinius's death are well documented. He was part of the Emperor's strike force that teleported aboard the Vengeful Spirit, but like the others, he was separated from his father by Horus's manipulation of the ship's warp-tainted interior. Sanguinius fought his way through demonic horrors and traitor space marines, his wings carrying him through blood-soaked corridors toward his destiny. When he finally reached Horus's throne room, he found his brother waiting for him. Horus tried one final time to turn Sanguinius to chaos. He offered the angel power, the chance to rule at his side, to become a demon prince and live forever in service to the dark gods. But Sanguinius refused, as Horus must have known he would. The angel's loyalty to the Emperor and to humanity was absolute, unshakable, incorruptible. No amount of power or promises could sway him from his path. The battle that followed was brutal. Even enhanced by the Chaos gods, Horus found Sanguinius a formidable opponent. The angel's skill with blade and psychic power was extraordinary, his martial prowess matched only by his utter determination. For a time, he actually held his own against the War Master, landing blows that cracked Horus's ancient armour, drawing blood, that the Chaos gods had tried to make immortal. But Sanguinius had been fighting for days without rest, battling his way through the Siege of Terror, and then through the interior of the Vengeful Spirit. He was exhausted, wounded, operating on pure will and the knowledge that he had to buy time for the Emperor. In the end, Horus proved too strong. The War Master caught Sanguinius with his enormous mace, Worldbreaker, and brought it down with all his chaos-enhanced might. The blow shattered the angel completely, breaking his body and wings, killing him instantly. Horus left Sanguinius's corpse at the foot of his throne, where the Emperor would find it moments later. Some accounts suggest that in dying, Sanguinius managed to inflict a critical wound on Horus, creating a weakness in his armour or spirit that the Emperor could exploit. Whether this is true remains debated, but what's certain is that Sanguinius's death affected both the Emperor and Horus profoundly. For the Emperor, finding his most beloved son dead was the final straw that made him stop holding back against Horus. For Horus himself, some accounts suggest that killing Sanguinius, the brother who had been closest to him before the fall, created a momentary crack in his chaos-forged certainty, a flash of regret that made him vulnerable. Whether Sanguinius's sacrifice was futile or ultimately meaningful depends on which version of events you credit. But either way, the angel is absolutely definitively dead. The impact of Sanguinius's death on the Blood Angels cannot be overstated. Every Blood Angel Space Marine inherits genetic memory of their Primarch's final moments, experiencing his death psychically at some point in their service. This psychic trauma manifests as the Black Rage, a berserk fury that can overwhelm Blood Angels' warriors and transform them into slavering killers who think they're fighting aboard the Vengeful Spirit, trying to save their Primarch. Additionally, the Red Thirst, the Blood Angels' hunger for blood, grew worse after Sanguinius's death, as if his demise had somehow accelerated the flaw in their gene seed. Sanguinius's body was recovered and entombed with highest honours. Unlike some Primarchs, whose remains vanished or were desecrated, the angel's corpse was treated with reverence, laid to rest in state on Baal. 10,000 years later, the Blood Angels still mourn their Primarch, still feel the psychic echo of his sacrifice, still rage against the cruel fate that took him from them. Of all the dead Primarchs, Sanguinius is perhaps the most mourned, because his nobility and goodness made him beloved not just by his own legion, but by much of the Imperium. Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, Primarch of the Iron Hands Legion, has the unfortunate distinction of being the first Loyalist Primarch to die during the Horus Heresy. His death at the drop site massacre on Istvan V was sudden, shocking, and set the tone for how brutal and unforgiving the civil war would become. Unlike Sanguinius, whose death was foreseen and occurred at the heresy's climax, Ferrus Manus died early, killed by his own former friend in what should have been a straightforward military engagement. Ferrus Manus was known for his metal hands, living necrodermis that had fused with his flesh after he strangled a dragon-like creature on Medusa and plunged his hands into its molten metal blood. These hands gave him supernatural strength and the ability to craft weapons and armour of extraordinary quality. He was close friends with Fulgrim, Primarch of the Emperor's Children, before the heresy, and that friendship would ultimately lead to his death. When news of Horus's betrayal reached the Loyalists, Ferrus Manus was consumed with rage. His reaction wasn't measured or strategic. It was pure fury that his brother could betray the Emperor. Against counsel from other Loyalists, Ferrus immediately prepared to strike at the traitors, determined to punish them for their treachery. This impetuousness would prove fatal. The Dropsite massacre was a trap. Horus had fortified himself on Istvan V after virus bombing Istvan III to eliminate any loyalists in his legion. The plan was for 7 legions to assault the traitor position, with 4 legions in the first wave and 3 more providing support and securing the landing zone. Ferrus Manus led the Iron Hands alongside Vulkan's Salamanders and Corvus Corax's Raven Guard in the first wave. What none of them knew was that 4 of the 7 legions were traitors themselves, secretly pledged to Horus and waiting for the perfect moment to reveal their allegiance. The first wave struck hard, making good progress against the apparent traitor positions, but then the second wave, which should have been supporting them, opened fire instead. The Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Wordbearers, and Alpha Legion revealed their true colours, slaughtering the Loyalists from behind while Horus's forces pressed from the front. It was a perfect killing field, a massacre that destroyed 3 entire legions in a matter of hours. During the chaos of the battle, Ferrus Manus confronted his former friend Fulgrim. The 2 Primarchs clashed in personal combat while the battle raged around them. Accounts of their duel vary, but all agree on the outcome. Fulgrim, by this point already well along the path to corruption by the chaos god Slanesh, managed to overcome Ferrus. Using a demonic sword gifted to him by the ruinous powers, Fulgrim struck off Ferrus Manus's head. What happened next is particularly grim. Fulgrim, immediately horrified by what he'd done, wept over his friend's corpse, experiencing a moment of agonizing clarity about what he had become. But this moment didn't last. The demon bound to his sword quickly reasserted control, and Fulgrim presented Ferrus Manus's head to Horus as a trophy. The War Master was delighted, and Ferrus's skull later became a macabre ornament aboard Horus's flagship. Some accounts suggest it was still there when Sanguinius entered the throne room to confront the War Master. The death of Ferrus Manus devastated the Iron Hands Legion. It robbed them of their leader when they needed him most, at the very moment when the galaxy descended into the worst civil war humanity had ever seen. The psychological impact on the Iron Hands was severe. They developed an obsession with purging weakness from themselves, viewing Ferrus's death as proof that flesh is fallible and must be replaced with machine. This led to the Iron Hands' extreme emphasis on cybernetic augmentation, their contempt for weakness, and their cold, calculating approach to warfare. Ferrus Manus is definitively dead. His decapitated body remained on Istvan V, his head became a trophy, and there's no mechanism for his return. Unlike some Primarchs, who are perpetuals or whose bodies were never recovered, Ferrus's fate is crystal clear. The Iron Hands have come to terms with this, after a fashion, accepting that their Primarch's death was part of their trial, a test that they must overcome by becoming ever more perfect machines of war. Some within the chapter have cloned Ferrus or attempted to resurrect him through various means, but these attempts always produce mad, defective copies, not the true Primarch. Konrad Curze, the Night Haunter, Primarch of the Night Lord's Legion, died very differently from the others on this list. While Horus, Sanguinius, and Ferrus Manus were killed in combat by enemies they were actively fighting, Curze allowed himself to be killed, orchestrated his own death as a final act of vindication for his twisted philosophy. His death was more suicide than murder, a deliberate choice made by a deeply disturbed individual who saw it as proof that he had been right, all along. Konrad Curze's story is one of the darkest in Primarch lore. He landed on Nostramo, a sunless industrial nightmare of a world where crime ran rampant and life held little value. The young Primarch, gifted with the ability to see possible futures, was bombarded with visions of death and horror from the moment he gained consciousness. These visions broke something in him, convinced him that the universe was fundamentally evil and that the only way to maintain order was through terror. Curze became a vigilante on Nostramo, brutally murdering criminals and displaying their mutilated corpses as warnings. His methods worked, in a fashion. Crime plummeted because everyone was too terrified to break the law. When the Emperor found him, Curze had united Nostramo through pure fear, creating a society where order was maintained only by the certainty of horrific punishment for any transgression. As Primarch of the Night Lords, Curze brought these same tactics to the Great Crusade. The Night Lords specialised in terror tactics, using psychological warfare, torture and mass murder to break enemy resistance. They were effective, but their methods disgusted many of their fellow legions. Curze defended his approach by pointing to its results, arguing that fear was the most reliable tool for maintaining compliance, that people needed to be terrified into obedience. But Curze's visions showed him that he would eventually be killed by an assassin, and this vision became an obsession. He came to see it as proof of a fundamental truth, that the Emperor and the Imperium were hypocrites. The Emperor condemned Curze for his brutality, but would eventually send an assassin to kill him, proving that the Emperor himself resorted to murder when convenient. Curze's death, in his twisted logic, would vindicate everything he had ever done. During the Horus heresy, Curze sided with the traitors, though his loyalty to Horus was questionable at best. He seemed to care less about the heresy's outcome than about pursuing his own nihilistic philosophy, terrorizing both loyalists and traitors alike. After the heresy ended, Curze fled with the remnants of his legion, hiding from imperial justice but knowing that eventually his vision would come true. The Emperor dispatched Mshen, an assassin of the Kalidas Temple, to hunt down Curze and execute him. When she finally infiltrated his stronghold on Segualsa, Curze was waiting for her. He could have fled or fought back, but he chose not to. Instead, he allowed Mshen to approach, even welcoming her presence. In his final moments, Curze delivered a speech directly into a recorder, knowing his words would be carried back to the Imperium. He argued that his death proved he was right. The Emperor, who claimed to represent law and justice, had sent an assassin to murder him outside any legal process. This, Curze claimed, validated everything he had ever done, every act of terror and torture. If the Emperor himself stooped to assassination, then Curze's philosophy of might making right was vindicated. The Night Haunter died smiling, believing his death was the ultimate proof of his cynical worldview. Mshen severed Curze's head and escaped with it, bringing it back to the Imperium as proof of her success. The Night Lord's legions splintered into warbands after their Primarch's death, becoming pirates and raiders who continue Curze's legacy of terror into the 41st millennium. Some Night Lords claim that Curze orchestrated his death as a final act of terror, ensuring that his philosophy would live on after him, that his sons would continue spreading fear across the galaxy in his name. Konrad Curze is definitively dead. His body was killed, his head removed, and unlike some Primarchs, there's no mystical resurrection mechanism that could bring him back. The Night Lords accept their Primarch's death, even celebrate it in a twisted way, seeing it as the ultimate example of his principles. Curze himself wanted to die, saw death as necessary to validate his worldview, and got exactly what he wanted. These four Primarchs, Horus, Sanguinius, Ferrus Manus, and Konrad Curze, represent the absolutely confirmed dead. Their deaths were witnessed, their bodies accounted for, their demise integral to major plot points in Imperial history. There's no ambiguity here, no room for surprise returns. They're gone, and they're staying gone, at least without massive retcons that would undermine fundamental aspects of the setting. Their deaths shaped the Imperium and continue to influence it 10,000 years later, proving that even in death, the Primarchs cast long shadows. Now we move to the opposite end of the certainty spectrum, the Primarchs whose current status is absolutely clear because they're active participants in the current timeline. These aren't mysteries at all. We know exactly where these Primarchs are and what they're doing because Games Workshop has brought them back to the game, given them models, rules and ongoing storylines. They walk the galaxy in the 41st millennium, and their presence shapes current events. This category breaks down into two subgroups: the Loyalist Primarchs, who have returned to lead the Imperium, and the Demon Primarchs, who serve chaos as immortal warp entities. Both groups are definitely alive, but they exist in very different states and serve very different masters. Roboute Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines and architect of the Codex Astartes, was dead for 10,000 years. Well, not exactly dead. More like mostly dead, suspended in stasis at the moment between life and death, preserved in a state of perfect stillness within the Temple of Correction on Macragge. His body showed no signs of decay, no movement, trapped in the instant after Fulgrim struck him down with a poisoned blade during a battle after the heresy. The Ultramarines kept vigil over their frozen Primarch for millennia, hoping against hope that someday he might return. That day finally came during the tumultuous events of the Gathering Storm. Belisarius Cael, the Archmagus of the Adeptus Mechanicus, had been working for 10,000 years on technology that might heal the Primarch. When the Inari, Eldari followers of the nascent god Enead, came to Macragge seeking allies against chaos, they brought with them the power to cheat death itself. Through a combination of Cael's advanced technology and the Inari's manipulation of death energies, specifically the power of the Eldari Psyker Ivrain, Guilliman was brought back to life. His resurrection wasn't simple or clean. The process required both the advanced science of the Mechanicus and what the Imperium would call Fel Xenos sorcery. This combination immediately made Guilliman's return politically complicated. Brought back by technology and alien magic, owing a debt to Xenos, the Lord Commander of the Imperium found himself in an awkward position with regards to Imperial dogma. But Guilliman had bigger concerns than theological arguments. When he awoke, Guilliman found an Imperium that horrified him. The secular, Enlightenment-focused empire that his father had tried to build had transformed into a brutal theocracy that worshipped the Emperor as a god. The very thing the Emperor had fought against during the Great Crusade, religious faith, had become the cornerstone of imperial society. The ecclesiarchy wielded enormous power. The Adeptus Ministorum controlled vast resources, and the imperial cult dominated every aspect of life across the Imperium. Guilliman was disgusted, but also pragmatic enough to recognise that this rotten system was all that stood between humanity and complete extinction. He couldn't tear it all down and rebuild, not with the Imperium besieged on all sides by enemies. Instead, he had to work within the corrupted framework, trying to reform what he could while maintaining the Imperium's defensive capabilities. His first major campaign saw him leading the Indomitus Crusade, a massive military operation launched across the galaxy to reinforce beleaguered Imperial worlds and push back the forces of chaos. The crusade was enabled by Belisarius Cael's other great work, the Primaris Space Marines, a new, improved generation of Astartes created from Guilliman's genetic template and enhanced beyond even the standard Space Marines. The Primaris Marines themselves represented another controversial element of Guilliman's return. Cael had been working on them in secret for 10,000 years, waiting for the right moment to reveal them. When Guilliman returned, he immediately authorized their deployment, reinforcing chapters across the Imperium with these new warriors. Some Space Marines welcomed the Primaris as saviours, necessary reinforcements in desperate times. Others viewed them with suspicion, seeing them as replacements, an insult to the chapter's traditional way of doing things. Guilliman's current role is exhausting and thankless. He serves as Lord Commander of the Imperium, effectively running the vast bureaucracy of the Imperium of Man, while also leading military campaigns, dealing with political intrigue, and trying to hold together an empire that's constantly on the verge of collapse. He has to balance competing factions within the Imperium, manage relationships with organisations like the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Ecclesiarchy, coordinate military responses to threats across the galaxy, and do all this while dealing with the psychological burden of knowing how far the Imperium has fallen from his father's vision. His return has also sparked tensions with other Imperial institutions. The Inquisition views him with suspicion, some Inquisitors questioning whether this returned Primarch is truly Guilliman, or perhaps some demon wearing his face. The Ecclesiarchy finds him uncomfortable, a secular voice from the past who doesn't share their religious fervour. Even some Space Marine chapters struggle with Guilliman's return, unused to taking orders from anyone after 10,000 years of independence. But Guilliman is undeniably alive and active. He's appeared in multiple recent storylines, fought on numerous battlefields, and shaped the direction of the current Warhammer 40,000 narrative. His status isn't a mystery, it's a central fact of the setting. We know where he is, usually either on Terra dealing with bureaucracy, or leading fleets to hotspots across the Imperium. What he's doing, trying desperately to save the Imperium from collapse, and how he feels about it, exhausted, horrified, but grimly determined. If Guilliman's return was dramatic and well publicised, Lionel Johnson's awakening was the opposite. The Lion, Primarch of the Dark Angels, simply woke up from his 10,000-year sleep and started hunting traitors, initially without bothering to announce his return to anyone. His reappearance came during the Arcs of Omen campaign, and unlike Guilliman's carefully managed resurrection, the Lion's return was more like someone deciding they'd slept long enough and getting up to do what needed doing. Lionel Johnson's story is one of betrayal and brotherhood lost. During the Horus heresy, he led the Dark Angels with stern efficiency, serving as Lord Protector of Imperium Secundus when the Loyalist forces thought Terra had fallen. But when he finally returned to his homeworld of Caliban after the heresy ended, he found that his trusted second-in-command, Luther, had turned against him, corrupted by chaos, and poisoning the minds of the Dark Angels garrison left on Caliban. The resulting conflict destroyed Caliban itself, the planet torn apart by weapons fire and warp storms. During the final confrontation between Lionel Johnson and Luther, the traitor struck his Primarch down with a psychically charged blow. The Dark Angels believed their Primarch killed, his body lost in the destruction, but the reality was stranger. The Lion survived, teleported away by Watchers in the dark, those mysterious Xenos who had long protected the Dark Angels' secrets. He was taken to the heart of what remained of Caliban, now called the Rock, the Dark Angels' fortress monastery, and placed in a hidden chamber where he slept in healing stasis, unknown to his own chapter. For 10,000 years the Lion slept while the galaxy turned without him. The Dark Angels kept their greatest secret, that their Primarch lived but couldn't be reached, couldn't be awakened, remained locked in chambers that even the chapter master couldn't access. They hunted the fallen, the traitor Dark Angels who had followed Luther, trying desperately to recapture every last one and make them repent, all while their Primarch slept mere meters away. The Lion's awakening seems to have been triggered by the galaxy-shaking events of the era Indomitus. As the Great Rift tore reality apart and the galaxy descended into new depths of chaos, something changed. The Lion woke up, found himself alone in the hidden chamber, and decided that explanations could wait. He armed himself, stepped into the galaxy through mysterious shadowy pathways that only he could access, and started doing what he did best, hunting and killing traitors. His first major act after awakening was confronting Angron, the demon Primarch of the World Eaters, during a massive battle on a warp-corrupted world. The Lion fought his fallen brother to a standstill, preventing Angron from completing whatever terrible ritual the demon Primarch had planned. After driving Angron off, the Lion continued his lonely crusade, moving through the shadows, appearing where he was least expected, striking at Chaos forces and then vanishing again before anyone could properly register what had happened. Eventually the Lion revealed himself to Roboute Guilliman, his returned brother. The meeting between the two was complex. They had worked together during the heresy as part of Imperium Secundus, but their relationship had always been thorny. Guilliman was the builder, the administrator, the one who wrote the Codex Astartes and restructured the Imperium after the heresy. The Lion was the hunter, the warrior, the one who preferred action to paperwork. Their differing philosophies created friction, but also complementary strengths. The Lion's current status is that of a wandering knight-errant, moving through the galaxy using strange powers that allow him to travel through what he calls the shadowed paths. These seem to be extensions of his connection to the Watchers in the Dark and the mysterious forces that protected Caliban. He can step into these paths and emerge somewhere else, covering vast distances or appearing exactly where he's needed. This makes him incredibly difficult to track or predict, a strategic asset but also a frustration for those trying to coordinate Imperial forces. Unlike Guilliman, who took up the mantle of Lord Commander and involves himself deeply in Imperial politics and administration, the Lion seems content to operate independently. He leads the Dark Angels and their successor chapters, collectively known as the Unforgiven, but he doesn't seek higher authority over the Imperium as a whole. His focus is on fighting, on hunting down traitors and threats, on being the sword rather than the shield. The Lion has also brought significant changes to the Dark Angels themselves. His return forced the chapter to finally confess their greatest secret, the existence of the Fallen and the corruption of Luther and the Caliban garrison. The Lion, rather than condemn his sons for keeping this secret for 10,000 years, understood why they did so, and chose to focus on the future rather than dwelling on past mistakes. He's begun forgiving fallen Dark Angels who show genuine repentance, bringing them back into the fold rather than simply executing them. Like Guilliman, the Lion is definitively alive and active in the current timeline. He has a model, rules on the tabletop, and ongoing storylines. His return represents one of the most significant events in recent Warhammer 40,000 lore, second only to Guilliman's resurrection in terms of impact on the setting. 2 loyalist Primarchs now walk the galaxy. 2 of the Emperor's sons return to lead humanity in its darkest hour. Now we shift to the demon Primarchs, those who fell to chaos during the Horus heresy and ascended to become immortal warp entities in service to the ruinous powers. These Primarchs are very much alive, but they exist in a state that would be unrecognisable to their former selves. They've traded mortality for immortality, humanity for demonhood, free will for eternal servitude to the Chaos Gods. Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, is perhaps the most tragic of all the demon Primarchs. Unlike many of his brothers who actively sought chaos or were slowly corrupted, Magnus was damned by his own good intentions, his arrogance, and a series of catastrophic mistakes that led him down a path he never intended to walk. Magnus was a scholar and psyker of extraordinary power, second only to the Emperor himself in psychic might. When he landed on the planet Prospero, he was raised by that world's psychic adepts, and grew to become the planet's leader. He built a civilization of scholars and sorcerers, a place where knowledge was valued above all else, and psychers were treated as valuable citizens rather than dangerous mutants. When the Emperor found Magnus, he gave him command of the Thousand Sons Legion, and tasked him with understanding the warp and humanity's psychic potential. But Magnus made a critical error. When he discovered through his psychic visions that Horus had fallen to chaos, he tried to warn the Emperor using sorcery. Desperate to get a message to Terra despite being far across the galaxy, Magnus performed a powerful spell that punched through the warp and projected his consciousness directly to the Imperial Palace. He didn't realize that the Emperor had been building a secret project, the Human Webway, and Magnus's spell destroyed it, shattering the Emperor's dream of weaning humanity off warp travel. Furious at this catastrophic failure, and manipulated by chaos, the Emperor ordered Leman Russ and the Space Wolves to bring Magnus back to Terra to answer for his crimes. But the order was twisted, or perhaps the Emperor's rage made him less clear than he should have been, and Russ interpreted it as permission to destroy the Thousand Suns. The Space Wolves attacked Prospero, burning the planet and slaughtering Magnus's sons. Magnus had been offered a deal by Tzeentch, the Chaos God of sorcery and change. The Architect of Fate would protect Magnus and his legion if Magnus would serve him. Magnus refused initially, unwilling to damn himself and his sons. But when he saw the Space Wolves butchering his 1,000 sons, when he realized that the Emperor had ordered their destruction, Magnus felt betrayed and abandoned. In that moment of despair, he accepted Tzeentch's offer, damning both himself and his legion to eternal servitude. The Ascension too. Demon Primarch changed Magnus fundamentally. His body transformed, growing larger, sprouting wings, becoming something no longer quite human or even Primarch. His mind was altered, bent toward Tzeentch's purposes, though Magnus retained more of his personality and intellect than some demon Primarchs. He became a creature of the warp, capable of wielding sorcery on a scale that could reshape reality itself, but also bound to Tzeentch's will, a puppet dancing on strings woven from ambition and curiosity. During the Siege of Terra, Magnus attacked the Emperor's Webway project, leading demon hordes in assault after assault against the Imperial forces defending the breach Magnus himself had created. He clashed with his brother Vulkan in the depths of the Webway, finding that even his demon-enhanced power couldn't overcome the Salamander's Primarch. Later, he fought in the Greater Siege, deploying his mastery of sorcery against the Defenders. In the current timeline, Magnus is active and dangerous. He emerged from the warp to attack the Space Wolves' homeworld of Fenris, seeking revenge for what Leman Russ had done to Prospero. The campaign was brutal, with Magnus deploying the full might of the Thousand Suns and their demon allies against the Space Wolves. The conflict ended with Fenris barely surviving, its population devastated, and one of its moons shattered. Magnus has also come into conflict with Roboute Guilliman since the Lord Commander's return. When Guilliman led forces to Sortiarius, the Thousand Suns demon world in the warp, Magnus fought against his loyalist brother. The battle was cataclysmic, with Magnus wielding sorcery that twisted reality, while Guilliman relied on tactics, strategy, and the Emperor's own flaming sword. Guilliman survived the encounter, barely, and Magnus was driven back, but the Crimson King remained undefeated. As a demon Primarch, Magnus is effectively immortal. Killing his physical form just sent him back to the warp to reform. He can be banished, disrupted, defeated in battle, but never truly destroyed unless someone manages to annihilate his true name or somehow permanently sever his connection to Tzeentch. This makes demon Primarchs particularly difficult threats, because defeating them is always temporary. Magnus's current status is absolutely certain. He's alive, active, and one of the primary antagonists in the ongoing narrative. He has a model, rules, and appears regularly in storylines involving the Thousand Suns. His Demon Prince form is dramatically different from his original Primarch appearance, all wings and cyclopean eye and sorcerous power, but it's definitely him, definitely Magnus, twisted by chaos but still recognisable in his motivations and methods. Mortarion, Death Lord and Demon Primarch of the Death Guard, travelled a path to damnation that combined coercion, fatalism, and a grim acceptance of inevitable corruption. Unlike Magnus, who made specific choices that led to his fall, Mortarion was pushed into chaos's embrace by circumstance and prophecy, by a sense that resistance was futile and submission was inevitable. Mortarion landed on Barbarous, a death world shrouded in poison fog, where humanity survived in the valleys while necromancers ruled the toxic peaks. He was found and raised by one of these necromancers, a tyrant who called himself the overlord of Barbarous and treated Mortarion with callous cruelty. Despite this harsh upbringing, or perhaps because of it, Mortarion developed an extraordinary resistance to toxins and a hatred of tyrants and psykers. He led a rebellion against Barbarus's necromancer lords, liberating humanity and nearly killing his adoptive father. But at the moment of triumph, the Emperor arrived and killed the Overlord himself, robbing Mortarion of his revenge. This created a resentment in Mortarion, a sense that the Emperor was just another tyrant, one more powerful entity imposing his will on lesser beings. Despite these feelings, Mortarion joined the Great Crusade, taking command of the Death Guard Legion. Mortarion's fall to chaos was orchestrated by Typhus, his first captain, who had been corrupted by Nurgle long before the heresy began. When the Death Guard's fleet became trapped in the warp during their journey to Terra, they found themselves infected by a terrible plague, the Destroyer Hive. Mortarion fought desperately to save his sons, using every method he knew, refusing to succumb. But the plague was too strong, designed specifically to overcome even a Primarch's legendary resilience. As Mortarion watched his sons die around him, as he felt the plague consuming his own body, Typhus revealed that only Nurgle could save them. Mortarion, broken by suffering and desperate to save his legion, called out to the Plague God. Nurgle answered, transforming the Death Guard into Plague Marines and elevating Mortarion to the status of Demon Primarch. The Death Lord had spent his entire life hating tyrants and psykers, and in his darkest moment he became a servant of the greatest tyrant of all, bound to Nurgle for eternity. The transformation was grotesque. Mortarion's already gaunt frame became bloated and corrupted, his body host to countless diseases, his very breath a cloud of poison. His scythe, Silence, was reforged as a demon weapon. He became the very thing he had always hated, a creature of supernatural power, a champion of corruption, a psyker manipulating the energies of the warp, even as he had once despised those who did so. During the Siege of Terra, Mortarion fought against his brother Jaghatai Khan in a climactic duel at the Lion's Gate spaceport. The two Primarchs had always been opposites, Mortarion slow, methodical, grinding, Khan fast, unpredictable, striking like lightning. Their battle reflected this, with Mortarion's endurance tested against Khan's speed. Ultimately, Khan managed to wound Mortarion severely enough to drive him from the field, claiming a Pyrrhic victory. In the current timeline, Mortarion leads the Death Guard from their demon world in the Eye of Terror. He was one of the first demon Primarchs to emerge and actively campaign in the 41st millennium, launching the Plague Wars against Ultramar. This massive invasion saw Mortarion deploy the full might of the Death Guard, spreading Nurgle's plagues across Guilliman's realm, corrupting planets and turning them into noxious breeding grounds for disease. The conflict between Mortarion and Guilliman is deeply personal. They were brothers once, worked together during the Great Crusade. Now they represent opposing visions of humanity's future. Mortarion offers the mercy of Grandfather Nurgle, the peace of accepting decay, the relief of surrendering to entropy. Guilliman represents continued struggle, fighting against impossible odds, refusing to accept defeat or corruption. Their philosophical opposition makes every battle between them ideological as well as military. Mortarion is definitively alive and active. He has a model, appears in multiple storylines, and commands the Death Guard in ongoing campaigns. Like Magnus, his status as a demon Primarch makes him effectively immortal within the current setting. He can be defeated, even temporarily killed, but he always returns, reforming in the warp to fight another day. His current form is a nightmare of plague and corruption, barely recognisable as the gaunt, bitter warrior he once was, but still undeniably Mortarion in personality and purpose. Angron, the Red Angel, Primarch of the World Eaters, might be the most tragic and terrible of all the demon Primarchs. His damnation began not with choices he made, but with what was done to him before he even met the Emperor. Angron's life was defined by rage, suffering, and the brutal neural implants called the Butcher's Nails that were forced into his brain, turning him into a weapon that could never be sheathed. Angron landed on Nuceria, where he was immediately enslaved and forced to fight as a gladiator. His captors implanted the butcher's nails, archaeotech devices that caused agonizing pain unless he was killing, creating a feedback loop that made Angron dependent on violence just to function without torture. He grew to hate his existence, leading a slave revolt not because he wanted freedom but because he wanted death, an end to his suffering. When the Emperor found Angron, the Primarch was about to die alongside his fellow slaves, surrounded by armies sent to crush their rebellion. The Emperor teleported Angron away, saving his life but abandoning all the other slaves to death. Angron never forgave this. His only family, the slaves he had fought beside, were slaughtered, while he was whisked away to lead a legion in the Emperor's crusade. From that moment, Angron saw the Emperor as just another tyrant, another master forcing him to kill. The butcher's nails should have killed Angron. Even the Emperor couldn't remove them without killing him. The implants were slowly destroying his brain, and by the time of the Horus heresy, Angron was barely sane, held together only by constant violence and rage. When Lorgar convinced Angron to undergo ascension to Demon Primarch, it was almost a mercy. The transformation killed what little remained of Angron's humanity, but it also ended his suffering, replacing the biological agony of the nails with the supernatural fury of a demon prince of Khorne. As a demon Primarch of Khorne, Angron became the ultimate embodiment of martial fury. His body transformed into a creature of brass and rage, enormous even by Primarch standards, wielding twin chain axes and surrounded by an aura of blood and hate. He led the World Eaters at the Siege of Terra, throwing himself against the walls with berserk ferocity, caring nothing for strategy or survival, only for killing and death. During one assault, Sanguinius himself confronted Angron. The two Primarchs, both bearing wings, though Angron's were bat-like and demonic rather than angelic, fought in a duel that epitomized their opposed natures. Sanguinius represented nobility, sacrifice, and controlled fury. Angron was pure rage, mindless violence, suffering weaponized. Sanguinius defeated Angron, banishing the Daemon Primarch back to the warp, but the effort cost him greatly, leaving him weakened for his final confrontation with Horus. In the current timeline, Angron emerged during the Arcs of Omen campaign, manifesting on a planet called Rimwood and leading a massive World Eaters invasion. His presence alone was enough to corrupt reality, his rage so intense that it warped the material world around him. The Lion confronted Angron in the battle that followed, and the two Primarchs clashed in a duel that shook the planet. The Lion managed to wound Angron severely, driving the Demon Primarch's own weapon through his throat, but couldn't truly kill him. As a demon, Angron simply returned to the warp when his physical form was destroyed, ready to manifest again when Khorne permitted. This temporary defeat didn't diminish Angron's threat, it merely delayed it. The Red Angel remains one of the most dangerous entities in the galaxy, a creature of pure violence that exists only to kill and to spread Khorne's worship through bloodshed. Angron is absolutely, definitely alive in his demon form. He has an updated model reflecting his demon Primarch status, appears in multiple storylines, and leads the World Eaters in the current timeline. His status isn't a mystery, he's an active antagonist, a known threat that the Imperium must contend with. Unlike his mortal form, which was dying slowly from the butcher's nails, his demon form is effectively immortal, bound to Khorne for eternity. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, Primarch of the Emperor's children, fell to chaos through a combination of pride, perfectionism, and possession by a demon. His corruption was gradual, beginning with reasonable ambitions and ending in complete damnation as he became a demon prince of Slaanesh, the chaos god of excess and sensation. Fulgrim landed on Chemos, an industrial world struggling to survive. He rose to leadership through talent and charisma, revitalizing Chemos' economy and transforming it into a thriving world. This success instilled in Fulgrim a belief in the virtue of perfection. the idea that anything worth doing was worth doing perfectly. When the Emperor found him, Fulgrim took command of the Emperor's children, the smallest legion, and set about making them the most perfect warriors in the Imperium. His downfall began with a demon-possessed sword called the Layer Blade, which he claimed during the compliance of a Xenos world. The demon within slowly corrupted Fulgrim, pushing his pursuit of perfection into obsession with experience, sensation, and excess. What began as wanting to be the best warrior became a need to feel everything, to experience every sensation, to push boundaries of pleasure and pain. During the Istvan V massacre, Fulgrim killed his closest friend, Ferrus Manus, in personal combat. The moment of the kill broke something in Fulgrim, or completed his corruption, depending on how you interpret events. Either way, by the time the heresy reached its climax, Fulgrim had fully embraced Slaanesh, ascending to Demon Prince, and transforming into a four-armed serpentine creature that barely resembled his former self. After the heresy, Fulgrim and his Emperor's children retreated to their demon world of Slaanesh in the Eye of Terror, where they indulged in every excess imaginable. They raided across the galaxy, seeking new experiences and sensations, spreading Slaanesh's corruption wherever they went. Fulgrim himself participated in some of these raids, but more often remained in his palace, lost in pursuits too depraved to describe. Recently, Fulgrim emerged from millennia of relative quiet. Games Workshop released a new model for him, a dramatic snake-like demon Primarch, wielding 4 weapons and radiating an aura of wrongness that captures Slaanesh's corrupting influence. His return to active service suggests that Slaanesh has new plans for the galaxy, and Fulgrim is the Prince of Pleasure's chosen instrument to fulfill them. Fulgrim is absolutely alive and active. Like the other demon Primarchs, he's immortal within the bounds of the setting, bound to Slaanesh for eternity. His status is confirmed, not mysterious. We know where he is, the Eye of Terror and occasionally emerging to raid, what he is, a demon prince of Slaanesh, and what he's doing, pursuing pleasure, pain, and perfection in their most extreme forms. His model, rules, and ongoing storylines make him one of the definitely alive category. These 6 Primarchs represent the confirmed alive and active category. 2 loyalists and 4 demon princes, all definitively present in the current timeline, all active participants in the ongoing struggle for the galaxy's fate. There's no mystery about their status, no ambiguity about their allegiances or natures. They're alive, and they're major factors in current events, shaping the narrative of the 41st millennium. Now we enter territory where certainty starts to break down. This tier includes Primarchs, whose deaths are recorded but have complications that make people wonder if maybe, possibly, there might be more to the story. Maybe only part of them was recovered. Maybe the source reporting their death is unreliable. Maybe there are hints in the lore that suggest things aren't quite as settled as they appear. Rogal Dorn, Primarch of the Imperial Fists, the master fortress builder who fortified Terra against Horus's assault, has one of the most frustratingly vague deaths in all of Primarch lore. He's listed as dead, and the Imperial Fists certainly treat him as such, but the circumstances of his demise are murky enough to leave room for doubt. The official story is that Dorn led a boarding action during a Black Crusade some centuries after the heresy. He and his Imperial Fists attacked a Chaos cruiser, boarding it to take the fight directly to the enemy. Dorn was last seen fighting deep in the ship's corridors, surrounded by traitors, refusing to retreat. When the surviving Imperial Fists escaped, Dorn was not among them. All they recovered was his hand, still clutching his chainsword, which they entombed in the most sacred shrine of their fortress monastery. Here's where it gets complicated. Only his hand was recovered, not his body, not his armour, just one hand. This detail has fueled speculation for decades among fans and in-universe Imperial historians alike. Did Dorn actually die on that ship, or did he fall through some warp rift to parts unknown? Was his body destroyed so completely that only the hand remained? Did he sacrifice himself in some way that obliterated his physical form? The Imperial Fists have never wavered in their belief that their Primarch fell in battle. They maintain his hand as a sacred relic, considering it proof of his death. But the lack of a body leaves just enough ambiguity to wonder. After all, we've seen how Vulkan can regenerate from near-total destruction. We know that Primarchs are extraordinarily difficult to kill permanently. Is it possible that Dorn survived, perhaps critically wounded, and is out there somewhere, recovering in secret? Some theories suggest that Dorn might have been captured rather than killed. Perhaps the Chaos forces took him prisoner, whisking his nearly dead form away for torture or corruption. This seems less likely given Dorn's personality. He was known for his absolute loyalty and iron will, not the kind of person who would break under torture or turn to chaos. But the possibility exists in the narrative space created by the missing body. Another theory plays with timeline issues. Different sources give conflicting accounts of when exactly Dorn died, and under what circumstances. Some place his death shortly after the heresy, others centuries later. This inconsistency suggests that maybe the Imperial records aren't as reliable as they claim, that perhaps something about Dorn's fate was deliberately obscured or misreported. The philosophical question of Dorn's death also matters. The Imperial Fists are one of the most stoic, duty-bound chapters in the Imperium. They specialise in siege warfare, in holding ground no matter the cost, in never retreating even when retreat would be tactically sound. Dorn dying in a desperate boarding action, surrounded by enemies, refusing to fall back, is perfectly in character. It's the death you would expect for him. And that's precisely what makes some people suspicious. It's too perfect, too thematically appropriate. But realistically, Rogal Dorn is almost certainly dead. The hand is a powerful symbol, one that the Imperial Fists have revered for 10,000 years. Games Workshop would face significant pushback if they suddenly revealed that Dorn had been alive all along, as it would undermine centuries of Imperial Fists lore and tradition. The mystery of his exact death isn't really about him potentially being alive. It's about how he died and whether all the facts are known. Dorn belongs in the dead but complicated category, because while we can be reasonably confident he's gone, the lack of a body and conflicting accounts create just enough ambiguity to fuel speculation. He's probably dead, likely dead, almost certainly dead, but that qualifier of almost is what keeps him from being as definitive as Horus or Sanguinius. This category includes Primarchs, who vanished but left behind compelling evidence suggesting they're still out there somewhere. These aren't complete mysteries. We have substantial reasons to believe these Primarchs survived their disappearances and might yet return. In some cases, we even have confirmation that they were alive relatively recently in the timeline. Vulkan, Lord of Drakes, Primarch of the Salamanders, is unique among all the Primarchs because he's a perpetual, a rare type of human blessed with true immortality. Perpetuals can regenerate from any injury, no matter how catastrophic, even death itself. This makes Vulkan's fate very different from other missing Primarchs, because we know that short of something truly extraordinary, he cannot permanently die. Vulkan's nature as a perpetual was revealed during the Horus heresy, when Konrad Curze captured him and spent months trying to kill him in increasingly horrific ways. Curze decapitated him, incinerated him, threw him out of airlocks into space and subjected him to every form of death imaginable. Every single time Vulkan regenerated, healing completely from wounds that would permanently kill even another Primarch. This drove Curze to madness, as his tortured philosophy couldn't comprehend an existence that could suffer but never end. After escaping Curze's torture, Vulkan fought through the rest of the heresy, including battling Magnus in the Emperor's Webway. Eventually he was killed by John Grammaticus, another perpetual who stabbed him through the heart with a piece of fulgurite, fossilized lightning that contained some of the Emperor's own power. This was supposed to be a permanent death, the one thing that could actually kill a Perpetual, but as we know from subsequent lore, it didn't stick. Vulkan reformed on Nocturne, his homeworld, his consciousness reconstituting from whatever quantum entanglement or metaphysical connection keeps Perpetuals alive. However, the death and resurrection seemed to damage him mentally. He was initially confused, damaged, not entirely himself. Over time he recovered, led the Salamanders for a period, and then did something very characteristic of him. He left. Before departing, Vulkan created 9 artifacts, powerful weapons and devices forged by his own hand. He scattered these across the galaxy and left behind the Tome of Fire, a collection of riddles and clues about where to find them. According to Salamander's tradition, when all 9 artifacts are recovered, Vulkan will return to lead his chapter once more. 5 of the 9 have been found so far, which means the Salamanders are more than halfway to their Primarch's prophesied return. But here's the thing. We know Vulkan was definitely alive as recently as 1,500 years after the heresy. In the Beast Arises series, set during a massive orc invasion in the early 32nd millennium, Vulkan appears on the world of Caldera, fighting orcs single-handedly and helping organise the Imperium's response to the threat. He led forces against the Beast, the largest and most intelligent orc warlord humanity had ever faced, apparently dying at the culmination of that campaign. Yet before that battle, Vulkan indicated that his return was temporary, that he was destined for another war in another time. This strongly suggests he's still alive somewhere, waiting for whatever prophecy or purpose he serves to call him back. As a Perpetual, he could be literally anywhere, hiding in some distant corner of the galaxy, fighting battles no one knows about, or simply living quietly until he's needed again. The Salamanders certainly believe they're Primarch lives. The entire structure of their chapter revolves around this belief. The Forge Father, a position held by a company captain who renounces his name to take on Vulkan's, dedicates his life to hunting for the lost artifacts. Multiple successor chapters have joined this hunt. The search for Vulkan's return drives Salamander's culture and strategy. Vulkan represents the strongest case for a missing Primarch definitely still being alive. He's confirmed as a Perpetual, confirmed to have returned at least once after his supposed death, and confirmed to have indicated he would return again. He's not dead, he's just not here right now. Where he is and when he'll come back remain mysteries, but that he survives somewhere is virtually certain. Corvus Corax, the Raven Lord, Primarch of the Raven Guard, disappeared into the Eye of Terror on a hunt that has lasted 10,000 years. Unlike Vulkan, whose status as a Perpetual guarantees his survival, Corax's continued existence is based on reported sightings, narrative implications, and the simple fact that he's hunting demon Primarchs in the warp and apparently succeeding. After the drop site massacre on Isstvan V destroyed most of the Raven Guard, Corax was consumed with guilt and rage. He obtained the Emperor's own gene-crafting knowledge to rebuild his legion quickly, creating enhanced space marines called Raptors. But the Alpha Legion had infiltrated his legion and sabotaged the process, creating mutated monsters instead of warriors. Corax was forced to personally execute these failed creations, and the trauma of mercy killing his own sons broke something in him. He locked himself in his tower for nearly a year, doing nothing but writing. When he finally emerged, he said only one word to his remaining Raven Guard: nevermore. Then he walked into his personal chambers and disappeared. The Raven Guard later found that he had simply vanished, with no sign of how or where he'd gone. We now know from more recent lore that Corax entered the Eye of Terror, going into the warp itself to hunt the traitor Primarchs who had betrayed him at Isstvan V. He was especially interested in Lorgar, the architect of the heresy, and pursued the Word-bearer's Primarch with single-minded determination. In the Eye of Terror, exposure to the raw stuff of chaos transformed Corax, but not through corruption. Instead, it revealed what Primarchs truly are beneath their Emperor-crafted exterior. All Primarchs are partly warp entities, their souls forged from warp energy and bound into physical shells by the Emperor's genetic sorcery. Corax's long exposure to the Eye of Terror burned away his mortal facade, revealing the warp creature beneath. He transformed into something simultaneously beautiful and terrible, a being made of living shadow that could shapeshift, split into flocks of ravens, or materialize as a humanoid form of blades and darkness. In this transformed state, Corax hunted word-bearers across their demon worlds. He slaughtered them by the thousands, an unstoppable shadow that appeared without warning and disappeared just as quickly. Eventually his hunt drew Lorgar himself, the demon Primarch forced to confront his former brother. They fought in a massive temple to the Chaos Gods, and Corax dominated the battle completely. He beat Lorgar badly, forcing the demon Primarch to flee into a sealed chamber and lock himself away to escape Corax's wrath. As Lorgar retreated, Corax screamed after him that even if it took 10,000 years, he would hunt down every last word-bearer, would kill Lorgar himself, would have his vengeance for Istvan V. The story ends with Corax still in the Eye of Terror, still hunting, still murdering traitors in the warp. This story is from the anthology Sons of the Emperor, specifically the short story Shadow of the Past written by Gav Thorpe. It's official Black Library material, which means it's as canon as anything in Warhammer 40,000. Corax is alive, transformed but still himself, still loyal to the Emperor, still pursuing his mission of vengeance. He's not corrupted by chaos despite his transformation. He's simply revealed what he always was under the genetic engineering. The Raven Guard don't know their Primarch's current status. They know he vanished. Know he said nevermore. Know he was consumed with guilt over his failed raptors. They don't know about his transformation or his activities in the Eye of Terror. To them, Corax is simply missing, possibly dead, definitely gone. But readers of the lore know better. Corax stalks the warp like a living nightmare, hunting traitors, killing word-bearers, an avenging shadow that serves the Emperor still. Corax's status is strongly implied alive, not because of prophecy or immortality, but because we've literally seen him active in relatively recent lore. He exists in a strange category, technically missing to the Imperium, but confirmed alive to the readers. His transformation means he might never return to the Raven Guard in a form they would recognize, but he's definitely still out there, still fighting, still loyal. Leman Russ, Wolf King of Fenris, Primarch of the Space Wolves, disappeared on a quest into the Eye of Terror with the cryptic declaration that he would return for the Wolf Time, a prophesied final battle at the end of the universe. His disappearance is wrapped in Space Wolves' traditions and promises, creating a strong implication that he's still alive somewhere, waiting for the right moment to return. The circumstances of Russ's disappearance are less clear than others on this list. According to Space Wolves' tradition, the Wolf King gathered his closest companions and informed them he was going on a quest to find something that could heal the Emperor. He told them to hold a great feast in his honor, then simply left, walking into the Eye of Terror with only his retinue. His final words before departing were that he would return for the Wolf Time, when the galaxy faced its ultimate crisis, and the Space Wolves would need their Primarch to lead them in the final battle. This isn't the kind of disappearance that suggests death. It's the kind of disappearance that explicitly promises return. Russ didn't vanish mysteriously or get lost in battle. He chose to leave, stated a purpose for leaving, and pledged to come back when needed. The Space Wolves take this promise seriously, periodically launching great hunts where they search the galaxy for any sign of their missing Primarch. One crucial detail, Magnus the Red, the demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns and Russ's ancient enemy, has claimed to know where Russ is. During various encounters, with Space Wolves, Magnus has taunted them with hints about their Primarch's location, suggesting that Russ's fate is known to him, even if he won't reveal it. This implies Russ is somewhere significant, possibly trapped, possibly in some kind of stasis, but probably not dead. Magnus wouldn't mock the Space Wolves with knowledge of a corpse. The taunt only works if there's some chance the Space Wolves could do something about it. The relationship between Russ and Magnus provides important context here. During the Horus heresy, Russ led the attack on Prospero that destroyed the Thousand Sons homeworld and nearly killed Magnus. The two Primarchs fought in personal combat, and Russ broke Magnus's back over his knee before Magnus used sorcery to escape. This betrayal created a deep enmity between the two legions that persists 10,000 years later. If anyone knows what happened to Russ, it makes sense that Magnus would, given how much both Primarchs define themselves through opposition to each other. Russ's status as a potential perpetual complicates things further. Some lore suggests he might share Vulkan's immortality, though this is less confirmed. If true, it would make his survival even more likely, as perpetuals are extraordinarily difficult to kill permanently. But even without immortality, Russ's physical prowess and combat skill would make him hard to kill, especially if he was being careful on his quest rather than throwing himself into suicide missions. The prophecy of the Wolf Time gives Russ's return a narrative purpose. In a setting where the galaxy is constantly on the brink of apocalypse, where each crisis seems like it might be the final one, the promise that Russ will return for the ultimate battle creates tension and anticipation. When the Wolf Time finally comes, when the Space Wolves' prophecies align and the end is truly nigh, Russ's return would be a massive plot event. Leman Russ is missing with strong evidence of survival. His disappearance was intentional, not the result of defeat or death. His final words promise return. An enemy who would know claims to know his location. He's probably alive, probably waiting somewhere, probably destined to return when the story demands it. He's not definitely alive like Vulkan, but he's got strong narrative protection suggesting he's still out there. This category includes Primarchs whose disappearances are genuine mysteries. We know they vanished, but we don't have strong evidence either way about whether they survived. They could be alive, hiding or trapped somewhere. They could be dead, their bodies lost in the vastness of space or the warp. The lore doesn't give us enough to make confident predictions. Jaghatai Khan, the Great Khan, the Warhawk of Chagoris, Primarch of the White Scars, vanished into the webway while pursuing Dark Eldar raiders. His disappearance is one of the cleaner missing persons cases in Primarch lore. We know when he disappeared, where, and under what circumstances. What we don't know is what happened after. Following the heresy and during the Great Scouring that followed, Khan led campaigns to secure the Imperium's borders and punish traitors fleeing into the darkness. During one such campaign in the Asan sector, he came into conflict with Dark Eldar raiders who had been tormenting Imperial worlds. The Khan, never one to let an enemy escape, pursued these raiders with typical White Scars ferocity. The chase led to the world of Coruscant 5, where the Dark Eldar were raiding in force. Jaghatai Khan engaged a powerful Dark Eldar lord, possibly an Archon of significant power, in battle. The fighting was brutal, but the Dark Eldar were retreating toward a webway portal. Rather than let them escape, Khan and elements of his First Brotherhood charged after them, disappearing into the webway in pursuit. That was the last anyone saw of the Khan. He didn't return. His First Brotherhood didn't return. They simply vanished into the webway, and 10,000 years later, no one knows what became of them. The White Scars have maintained a particularly savage hatred of the Dark Eldar ever since, blaming them for their Primarch's disappearance and taking every opportunity to make war against the torturous Xenos. The webway is a labyrinth that exists between real space and the warp, a network of tunnels and passages created by the ancient Old Ones and later claimed by the Eldari. It's easy to get lost in, especially for those not intimately familiar with its paths. The Dark Eldar, who live in Commorragh deep within the webway, know its passages better than anyone. They could have led Khan into a trap, could have sealed pathways behind him, could have abandoned him in sections that lead nowhere. But the webway is also a relatively safe place, at least safer than the raw warp. It's possible Khan is still in there, still pursuing his enemies or trying to find his way out. The webway is vast enough that someone could wander for millennia without finding an exit, especially if they're being actively blocked or misled. Khan could be alive but trapped, unable to return to real space but also unable to give up his hunt. Alternatively, Khan could have been killed by the Dark Eldar or whatever other horrors lurk in the webway. The Dark Eldar are masters of torture and murder, and even a Primarch can be overwhelmed by sufficient numbers of Kabbalite warriors, homunculi, or worse. If Khan was led into an ambush with no avenue of escape, even his legendary prowess might not have been enough to save him. The White Scars believe their Primarch will return, though this belief is more hope than certainty. Unlike the Space Wolves, who have specific prophecies about Russ's return, the White Scars don't have any divine promise that Khan will come back. They simply refuse to believe their Primarch could be permanently gone, that the Warhawk would let himself be caged or killed by Xenos. Periodically, rumours surface of a lone warrior in white armour appearing from nowhere to help embattled Imperial forces, then vanishing just as mysteriously. The White Scars always investigate these reports, hoping each one might be their lost Primarch, but so far none have panned out. Whether these are Khan's ghost, wishful thinking, or some other explanation entirely remains unknown. Khan's status is truly uncertain. He could be alive in the webway, still hunting, still trying to find his way home. He could be dead, killed by Dark Eldar or lost to some webway hazard. He could be trapped in a time-dilated section where subjectively only moments have passed while millennia flowed by in real space. The webway's strange properties make any of these possibilities plausible. Unlike Vulkan or Corax, we don't have recent sightings or confirmed evidence of survival. Khan is just gone, with no clear indication either way. Lorgar, the Urizen, the first heretic, Primarch of the Word-Bearers, is technically alive as a demon Primarch, but he's been completely inactive for thousands of years. He's not missing in the sense that we don't know where he is. He's on Sicarus, the Word-Bearer's demon world, but he might as well be missing for all the difference his presence makes. Lorgar has locked himself in meditation, contemplating the nature of chaos, and hasn't emerged for millennia. This is particularly frustrating because Lorgar was arguably the most important traitor Primarch in terms of causing the heresy. He orchestrated the corruption of Horus, his chaplains spread the seeds of chaos worship throughout the legions, and his actions on Calth and elsewhere set in motion events that led directly to the Emperor's entombment on the Golden Throne. Lorgar was the architect of the Imperium's greatest disaster. But after the heresy, something changed in Lorgar. Perhaps it was his near-death experience at the hands of Corvus Corax. Perhaps it was disillusionment with the Chaos God's victory not being as glorious as promised. Whatever the reason, Lorgar retreated to Sicarus and hasn't been seen since. He doesn't lead his legion, doesn't participate in Black Crusades, doesn't do anything. He just sits in his tower, presumably thinking deep thoughts about the nature of chaos. This has created a strange situation where Lorgar is technically alive and accessible. His legion knows where he is, could probably go talk to him if they really needed to, but also functionally absent from the setting. He's not contributing to any storylines, not appearing in any battles, not doing anything that would make him relevant to current events. For all practical purposes, he's as missing as Khan, just in a different way. The Word-Bearers revere their Primarch, but also carry on without him. They've had 10,000 years to adapt to Lorgar's absence, to develop their own command structures and strategic approaches. They still worship chaos with fervent devotion, still spread the corruption of the ruinous powers, still serve as the ideological core of chaos worship in the galaxy, but they do so without active guidance from their Primarch. Speculation about why Lorgar has withdrawn varies. Some think he foresaw something terrible and is preparing for it. Others believe he's disgusted with how chaos turned out, that the reality of serving the ruinous powers disappointed him compared to the philosophical ideal he imagined. Still others suggest he's pursuing some great working, some ritual or scheme that requires millennia of preparation. The fact that Corvus Corax is hunting word-bearers in the Eye of Terror, specifically hunting Lorgar, adds another layer to this. Did Lorgar lock himself away to hide from his vengeful brother? Is his meditation actually cowering in a sealed chamber while Corax stalks around outside? Or does Lorgar know something about Corax's transformation that makes him hesitate to confront his brother? Lorgar's status is alive but effectively missing. He exists, he's confirmed as a demon Primarch, but he's removed himself from the narrative so completely that he might as well not exist. If Games Workshop decided tomorrow that Lorgar has actually been dead for centuries, and the word-bearers just didn't notice, it wouldn't require significant retconning. Conversely, if they decided to have Lorgar emerge from his meditation and start actively participating in current events, that also wouldn't contradict existing lore. Perturabo, the Lord of Iron, demon Primarch of the Iron Warriors, is in a similar situation to Lorgar, technically alive, technically accounted for, but functionally absent from the setting for mysterious reasons. Unlike Lorgar, who's explicitly in meditation, Perturabo just seems to be ignoring the galaxy, holed up in his fortress in the Eye of Terror doing something. Perturabo was always the bitter Primarch, the one who felt underappreciated and overworked. During the Great Crusade, he and his Iron Warriors were constantly assigned the thankless siege warfare that other legions avoided. They broke fortifications, suffered massive casualties, rebuilt their numbers, and did it all over again. Meanwhile, Primarchs like Horus and Sanguinius got the glory campaigns, the heroic charges, the victories that poets would sing about. This resentment made Perturabo vulnerable to Horus's manipulation. When the War Master turned traitor, Perturabo joined him, finally seeing an opportunity to prove his worth and strike back at an Imperium that had used him without appreciation. During the Heresy, Perturabo proved his genius, designing siege weapons and strategies that brought the Imperium to its knees. His Iron Warriors were instrumental in the Siege of Terror, their expertise in siege warfare making them invaluable to Horus's campaign. After the Heresy failed, Perturabo retreated to the Eye of Terror and ascended to Demon Primarch. Unlike the other Demon Primarchs who serve a single Chaos God, Perturabo's allegiance is more complicated. He seems to have taken some aspect of Chaos Undivided, or perhaps he simply refuses to fully commit to any single patron. His demon form is less dramatically transformative than Magnus or Angron, still recognisably Perturabo, just more so, enhanced rather than replaced. Since his ascension, Perturabo has been largely absent from Imperial records. The Iron Warriors continue to wage war across the galaxy, their siege expertise making them terrifying opponents, but they do so seemingly without direction from their Primarch. Perturabo remains in his fortress, Medrengard, in the Eye of Terror, but what he does there is unclear. Some theories suggest Perturabo is building something, using his legendary engineering skill to construct some massive project. Given infinite time and resources in the warp, what would a bitter genius with godlike power create? A weapon to destroy terror? A fortress to challenge the gods themselves? Whatever it is, it's keeping him occupied enough that he hasn't personally led the Iron Warriors in millennia. Another theory suggests Perturabo simply doesn't care anymore. His entire life was defined by resentment, by feeling unappreciated, by comparison to his brothers. Now that most of his brothers are gone, and the Imperium has fallen into decay, perhaps the victories feel hollow. He achieved everything he thought he wanted, broke the Imperium, proved his superiority, became immortal, and found it wasn't satisfying. So he retreats to his fortress and broods, a bitter god with nothing left to prove. The mention of a powerful demon killing Rogal Dorn during a Black Crusade is interesting here. Some sources suggest this demon was Perturabo, that the two Primarchs had a final confrontation aboard that Chaos Cruiser. If true, it would mean Perturabo has at least one confirmed post-heresy appearance in which he killed his rival. But this is speculation based on hints rather than confirmed lore. Perturabo is alive but disengaged. He exists somewhere in the Eye of Terror, doing whatever demon Primarchs do when they're not actively trying to destroy the Imperium. Whether he'll ever emerge to lead the Iron Warriors personally again, or whether he's content to let his legion operate independently, remains unknown. He's not missing in the sense that his whereabouts are a mystery, but he's absent in a way that makes him effectively irrelevant to current events. This deserves its own category because Alpharius Omegon, the twin Primarchs of the Alpha Legion, make everything complicated. Their entire existence is built on deception, misdirection, and uncertainty. They're the only Primarch where we genuinely cannot be sure what their status is, because their nature makes any report of their death suspect by definition. The Alpha Legion was unique among all the Space Marine legions because it was led by twin Primarchs. Alpharius and Omegon were identical, could swap places, seamlessly, and encouraged their Marines to all look alike, to adopt similar mannerisms, to make identification of any individual Alpha Legionnaire impossible. The whole point was to create confusion about who was where, who gave which orders, who even existed. During the Horus heresy, the Alpha Legion's loyalties were ambiguous. They officially sided with Horus, but their actions were sometimes helpful to loyalists, sometimes devastating to traitors. They followed their own agenda, their own secret plans, and no one understood what they were really doing. This ambiguity has persisted into the current timeline, with the Alpha Legion still playing both sides and pursuing mysterious objectives. Alpharius supposedly died during the Battle of Pluto, killed by Rogal Dorn in single combat. This is documented in official sources, described in Black Library novels. Dorn struck down Alpharius, and when the Primarch died, the Alpha Legion felt his death psychically, temporarily disrupting their coordination. This should be definitive proof that at least one of the twins died. But here's the catch. Which twin was it? The Alpha Legion deliberately obscured which twin was Alpharius and which was Omegon. They swapped roles, shared the name Alpharius, and ensured no one could tell them apart. When Alpharius died on Pluto, was it actually Alpharius, or was it Omegon using his brother's name? The surviving twin then adopted the Alpharius identity, leaving everyone to think Omegon had died when actually Alpharius had. After the heresy, there's another report of Alpharius dying, this time killed by Roboute Guilliman on Escrador. But the source of this report is the Ultramarines' own records, and even they acknowledge the information might have been manipulated. The entire battle could have been staged, the death faked, designed to make people think the Alpha Legion's leader was gone so they would underestimate the Legion. Neither of these deaths can be trusted because of who we're dealing with. The Alpha Legion's whole operational philosophy is based on deception. They could have faked either death, or both, or neither. They could have had body doubles. They could have psychically manipulated people into believing things that didn't happen. The very nature of the Alpha Legion makes it impossible to know the truth. Some theories suggest both twins are dead, killed in separate engagements, and the Alpha Legion simply carries on their tradition of deception without them. Other theories propose that one twin is dead and the other continues to lead the Legion in secret. The most paranoid theories suggest both twins survived and continue to manipulate events from the shadows. Their deaths merely acts of theatre designed to give them freedom to operate unseen. There's even a possibility that the twins have learned how to fully share identity, that the question of which one is really Alpharius has become meaningless because they've merged into a single consciousness distributed across multiple bodies. The Alpha Legion's recruitment methods and emphasis on shared identity could be an extension of whatever the twins discovered about consciousness and individuality. The current status of Alpharius Omegon is unknowable by design. Every piece of information could be disinformation. Every death could be a fake. Every sighting could be someone else wearing their armour. The Alpha Legion wants it this way, needs it this way, because their entire strategic approach depends on enemies not knowing what's real. From a narrative perspective, this makes Alpharius Omegon unique among Primarchs. Every other Primarch's status, even the mysterious ones, has some baseline level of likely truth. But with the twins, we genuinely cannot be certain of anything. They could both be alive. They could both be dead. One could be alive. They could have transcended physical existence entirely through some warp-based consciousness sharing. Any of these possibilities could be true, and we would have no reliable way to determine which. And finally, we reach the two Primarchs, who represent the ultimate mystery in Warhammer 40,000 lore. The Lost Primarchs, the 2nd and the 11th. These two were deliberately erased from Imperial history, their names forbidden, their legions scattered or destroyed, their very existence expunged from official records. What happened to them is one of the biggest deliberately unanswered questions in the setting. What we know about the Lost Primarchs is frustratingly little. We know they existed, that there were 20 Primarchs created, not 18. We know their legions, the 2nd and 11th, existed and fought in the Great Crusade for a time. We know that something terrible happened, bad enough that the Emperor ordered them removed from history entirely, and we know that the other Primarchs were forbidden from speaking about their lost brothers. Scattered through the lore are tantalizing hints and fragments, conversations between Primarchs where they almost mention the lost ones before catching themselves, references to an oath sworn never to speak of them again, statues in the Imperial Palace showing 20 pedestals, but only 18 Primarchs, with 2 spaces covered in shrouds. These breadcrumbs tell us that the other Primarchs knew what happened, remembered their lost brothers, but were commanded to silence. The most substantial hints come from the novel The First Heretic, where word-bearers explore the Emperor's gene laboratories beneath the Himalayan mountains. They see visions of the past, including the moment when the Primarchs were scattered by chaos. And they discuss the lost Primarchs, noting that the Ultramarines Legion mysteriously swelled in numbers around the time each lost Primarch was removed from Imperial records. This suggests that at least some of the 2nd and 11th Legion Space Marines were absorbed into the Ultramarines rather than destroyed. There are also hints that Leman Russ and his Space Wolves were involved in whatever happened to at least one of the lost Primarchs. References to Russ having a reputation as the Emperor's executioner, the one you sent to eliminate threats that couldn't be dealt with through normal means, combined with cryptic statements from the Lion about his own legion nearly suffering the same fate as the lost ones. This paints a picture of internal Legion's conflicts that went very, very wrong. Fan theories about what happened to the lost Primarchs vary wildly. Some think they turned to chaos before Horus did, proving that Primarchs could fall and prompting the Emperor to cover it up. Others suggest they refused the Emperor's crusade, rejecting their purpose and being executed for it. Still others propose they died in embarrassing ways, or were corrupted by Xenos, or went insane, or committed atrocities so terrible that the Emperor couldn't allow anyone to know. The meta-reason for the Lost Primarchs is clear. Games Workshop left 2 blank spaces in the Primarch roster, so that fans could create their own successor chapters and claim descent from these mysterious lost legions. It's a storytelling device that allows creative freedom while maintaining the official lore framework. But the in-universe explanation remains deliberately obscured. What we can say with certainty is that the Lost Primarchs are almost certainly dead. The Emperor doesn't half measure when it comes to existential threats, and he doesn't leave loose ends. If he ordered these Primarchs erased from history, he made sure they were really gone, not just hidden away somewhere. Whatever they did, or whatever happened to them, was permanent. The Lost Primarchs represent the ultimate unknowable in Primarch lore. While other mysteries might eventually receive answers, while missing Primarchs might return and clarify their fates, the 2nd and 11th will probably remain forever shrouded. Games Workshop has stated they have no plans to ever reveal their identities or fates. The mystery serves the setting better than any answer could. So there you have it. Every Primarch's fate, ranked from absolute certainty to total mystery. We've got the definitely dead: Horus, Sanguinius, Ferrus Manus, and Konrad Curze. We've got the definitely alive and active: Guilliman, the Lion, and the 4 active demon Primarchs, Magnus, Mortarion, Angron, and Fulgrim. We've got the complicated cases like Rogal Dorn, whose death is recorded but whose lack of a body creates lingering doubt. We've got the probably alive, Vulkan the Perpetual who literally cannot die, Corvus Corax confirmed hunting in the warp, and Leman Russ who promised to return. We've got the uncertain, Jaghatai Khan lost in the webway, Lorgar in eternal meditation, Perturabo brooding in his fortress. We've got Alfarius Omegon, where the entire question of their fate is made meaningless by their nature, and we've got the lost Primarchs, forever, erased, forever unknown. The fates of the Primarchs tell us something fundamental about the Warhammer 40,000 setting. Even gods can fall, even immortals can vanish. Certainty is rare, mystery is common, and the truth is often deliberately obscured. The Primarchs were created to be humanity's supreme commanders, immortal leaders who would guide the species to its destiny among the stars. Instead, they became symbols of how even the best-laid plans can go catastrophically wrong. 10,000 years after their creation, 2 have returned to active service. 4 serve chaos as demon princes. 4 are definitely dead. And the rest? The rest are somewhere between probably dead and definitely alive, scattered across this spectrum of certainty we've explored today. Some will probably return in future storylines, others will remain mysteries forever. And a few might stay in their ambiguous state, neither confirmed alive nor definitely dead, occupying that narrative space where anything could happen. That's what makes Primarch lore so compelling. Every disappearance is a story. Every death has consequences. Every return changes the setting. These 21 beings, these genetically crafted demigods, shape the Imperium and continue to cast long shadows across the galaxy. Whether they're walking the battlefield or lying dead for 10 millennia, whether they're hunting in the warp or lost in the webway, they matter. They're the reason the Imperium is what it is, for better or worse. So the next time someone asks you what happened to the Primarchs, you can tell them, it's complicated. Some died heroically, some fell to chaos, some just walked away and never came back. And a few were erased so thoroughly that even asking what happened to them is forbidden. That's the grimdark future of Warhammer 40,000, where even the fates of gods are uncertain. Thanks for watching this deep dive into every Primarch's final fate. If you enjoyed this exhaustive exploration of Space Marine daddy issues and demigod disappearances, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the Obsidian Scriptorium for more Warhammer 40,000 lore content. We've got plenty more dark, detailed discussions of the grim darkness of the far future coming your way. Until next time, stay vigilant, trust no one, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, even knowing who's actually dead is a privilege reserved for the truly informed.